Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all to session number 23 of ICF Travel Series Breaky. And today we are lucky to have Mr. Amish Mulmi, who is the author of the book All Roads Lead North, Nepal's Turn to China. It was released a couple of months back and has been doing very well. And I'm happy to see our some ex-presenters also in the participants, Brigadier Hirak Kar and also adventure cyclist Sudhanshu Verma. So Amish, I think we will wait 1 or 2 minutes more before we start so that maybe more people join.
All right, sure. Yeah.
We get participants from a lot of countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and today I think we should be getting
If we from Nepal as well, hopefully.
yeah. At least in the registrations, there were
Yeah.
quite a few from Nepal,
Yeah.
even the United States. So
That's nice. Yeah.
so I think you can start now by giving a small intro, and then you can start your
Should I?
presentation.
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you, Indian Copy Editors Forum, and all the audience here. It's a difficult time for all of us in South Asia, so I'm really glad you guys have joined us. As Vivek said, I've recently published a book called All Roads Lead North, Nepal's Turn to China. A lot of it is essentially about Nepal's history with China and Tibet. And Vivek has explicitly asked me not to talk about any geopolitics. So what I will do is I will share a small presentation in which I will be talking about how I've approached the Himalayas in my book and how I've written about them, the places I visited, what made me interested in those places, and the stories that I wanted to tell. And what sort of an approach did I take in my, let's say, travel writing, in the way I approach history, in the way I approach the Himalaya. I'll just share a screen. Can everyone see the introduction screen? It's called Himalayan Borderlands. Vivek? Yeah, all right.
Yes.
Sure. So one of the first things I wanted to explore in this book was Nepal's history with Tibet and China, looking at it from the borderlands. And what we learn is that there is this old history of trade, of religious exchange, of cultural exchange that goes on between traders from the Nepali side of the Himalaya as well as and on the Tibetan side of the Himalaya. So this is a picture of old Newar traders from Kathmandu. They used to travel to Lhasa in caravans. And so one example that I can give you is, so this is a picture clicked in the 1940s where there was a chamber of commerce established in, these are all Newar traders from Kathmandu. They were all living in Lhasa. They used to live for 3-5 years at a stretch. It began from the 16th, 17th century at least. We know that Newar traders were in Lhasa from that time onwards till at least 1950s, 1960s. And they used to have families there. They used to wear Tibetan women, and they used to bring goods in from Calcutta and then take them across to Tibet. Now, until the 1903 Young Husband expedition, what used to happen was that Nepali traders used to use the passes on the Nepal side. There were two passes particularly called Kerung and Kuti to go over to Lhasa. Now, after 1903, when Britain got trading rights and an opening into Tibet, Nepali traders found it easier to go to Calcutta, where they used to have offices, purchase all the goods they needed to trade in Lhasa. They used to take them all the way to Kalimpong, where Kalimpong was a big center of Newar traders in India, in Sikkim, in West Bengal, sorry. And from there on, via Sikkim's passes, Jalepla and Nathula, used to cross over into Tibet. Now, but while Newar traders were one of the major sort of trading communities who traded actively in Lhasa on the Silk Road, they used to travel as far as Ladakh. We have evidence that there were Newar traders in Ladakh as well. Tibetan traders used to continuously cross the Himalayas. What they used to do is they used to bring salt and gold and wool from Tibet, and then come into Nepal, then even in Kumaon, in fact, and in other places of the Himalayas. They used to come this side, they used to take back grains. So it was a sort of a barter trade that was going on. And so this history of trade, this history of cultural exchange based around Buddhism, which is one of the major factors why people could, sort of Neva traders could live in Lhasa, because a lot of these Neva traders were Buddhists. So I was very interested by that, because this told me a Himalayan history that is very different from the usual notions of exploration of mountaineering, of the whole idea of imperial conquest, of looking at the Himalaya as a security buffer. And I wanted to break free of that. I wanted to break free of that notion. And I wanted to show the Himalaya were a very dynamic place where communities were actively engaging with each other. They were trading with each other. They had familial relations with each other on everyday basis. So that was one of the points where I started off. And what I did was that I wanted to see this history of trade coming into the 21st century. What has happened to it? These places that were active in these sort of exchanges, what has become of them today? And a lot of my travel writing, therefore, was based around the idea of, I was not writing about what I saw as much as I wanted to bring out the stories of the people who live in these areas, who live in these communities even now, and have developed new ways because of China's infrastructure investments in Tibet, and they've been able to do that. I wanted to look at how these people, these societies looked at themselves, they viewed themselves, and how they had adapted to or innovated in the face of, let's say, modern state policies, modern borders, because obviously the idea or the concept of a border is very, very new in the mountains, in the Himalayas. So the first thing I did was I went to this place called Limi Valley in Humla. I went here in September 2018. Now, Limi Valley is a very, very curious place. It's remote for sure. Humla, in fact, is a district that is not connected to Nepal by road even today. There are roads within Humla, as we will see, but there's a very interesting side to that story. And what's happening in Limi today is that it's a trans-Himalayan valley of 3 villages, which is about 900 people. And despite the remoteness, because of China's infrastructure upgrades, because of China's development push in Tibet, they've been able to devise new ways of trade. And how we will see that. So this is this village called Halji, which is situated at a height of about like 3,600 meters. As you can see, if you can see my mouse, I had gone here, there was a trade fair happening, and this is the village. And this is the grounds where the trade fair was happening. This is a very, very old village. There are 3 villages in Limi: Halji, Jang, and Til. And this is the village with the highest number of people. And this also has the oldest monastery in the region. This is, in fact, a 1,000-year-old Rincheling monastery, which is one of the... So there was this Tibetan translator in the 9th or 10th century called Rinchen Zanpo, and this was the period when Tibet was seeing a revival of Buddhism, and especially in Western Tibet. And Rinchen Zanpo was one of those translators who came across to Kashmir, and he collected Sanskrit texts, he took them back to Tibet, and he translated them all into Tibetan. And it is said that he established 108 monasteries across Tibet and across the Himalayan highlands. And this particular monastery, the Rinchen Monastery in Halji, is the 108th monastery. This Limi Valley, as we have seen, is very, very close to Kailash. To get here, to get to Limi Valley, there's this pass called Nyalu Pass, which is about, I think it's about 5,000 meters high. Now, to get here, we had to walk for 3 days. It was quite incredible. We were walking in the monsoons. As you can see, there's still clouds, so we're walking in the rain pretty much. It is quite, it was an experience, as I'm sure you guys know how it is in the mountains. What is interesting is that at the pass, this is clicked at the pass, there were 2 trucks who had come to take us over into Limi. Now, where do these roads come from? What are these roads doing this high in the mountains when the district itself is not connected to the rest of Nepal? The interesting part about Limi Valley is that the first road that was built in Limi did not come from Nepal, but it came from Tibet, it came from China. And because of that, we can see that there is an active trade in consumer goods. You have almost all, let's say, you have rice, you have wheat, you have beers, you have cigarettes, you have noodles, tissue papers, everything coming in from China, from this particular town called Taklakot or Purang, which is the base for the Kailash tour. We'll talk about that as well. So Limi's villages, all three villages have one particular store, have one store in each of them where they sell these goods, these Chinese goods. And all of them are coming from the other side using these roads that I will just, so this is the road that goes to the border. The border is this pass called Lapcha. It's again at around 5,000 meters. And this dirt track was built in 2010, 2011. What Limi's locals did was in association with their former member of parliament. He's now a member of parliament there, but he was not a member of parliament at that time. And together with another partner of his and contributions from Limi locals, what they did was they sent in bulldozers north from Kathmandu via another this border post called Raswagari, which we will see. And via Raswagari, they went into China, via Tibet, and then they brought down the bulldozers from this pass. Now, this pass is Lapchala. And if you can see my cursor, in the distance, there's a slight line of blue. That is the Mansarovar Lake. And we can't see it right now because it's covered by clouds, but Kailash is in the distance, Mount Kailash. This is the only place in Nepal from where one can view Kailash and Mansarovar. To us, or rather to me, what was interesting was these bulldozers, they came down this way. They came down from the other side round and they came down into Nepal and they started building this dirt track that we just saw. So what's interesting about Limi today is that despite its remoteness, I mean, as I've told you, that it still is not connected to Nepal, and its locals had devised ways to adapt or innovated in many, many ways to build this sort of dynamic community of trade based on China's, let's say, upgrades, right? So what we see is that in Limi, there are several people who work in Taklakot as labor. They earn about 150 to 170 RMB a day. In Nepali terms, that's about a little more than 3,000 NC a day, which is quite a lot compared to Nepali wages. They work as construction labor for the most part, but several of them have also started stores. A lot of them also deal in these wooden bowls called furu, which is what I had based my let's say, experiences on. I had spoken to a furu trader. Now, furu is this maple bowl that is used in all Tibetan religious ceremonies. And across Tibet, in fact, across the Himalayas, it is known that Limi's bowls are the best. In earlier times, they would gather the maple from locally, but now they don't have sufficient maple trees in their neighborhood. So what they do is they go all the way to Dehradun, to Saharanpur in India, where they buy these maple bowls. They come, they shape them in India. They come to Kathmandu. In Kathmandu, what they do is they beautify it. They give it a polish. They put silver bands. They take it back to Limi, and via Limi, then they cross the border into Taklakot, where they have stores, and that's how. So Himalayan trade, as we see it, has evolved from the days when salt and, let's say, salt and gold used to come from Tibet, wool used to come from Tibet, and grains used to be sent back. So we've seen an evolution in that. Now, the second place I went to after Limi was Mustang. Mustang is a very, very interesting place with a lot of history. This was an old autonomous kingdom until it used to be a separate kingdom until the Shahs of Gorkha incorporated within Nepal in the late 18th century, and since then it's become a part of Nepal. With, of course, it has its own king even now. It's a little bit parallel would be, let's say, the princely states of India. They no longer function in any way, but the title still remains. Similarly, Mustang also has its own king. Now, you can see this is an old kingdom. The capital is about 3,800 meters high. In the distance, you can see at the top of these two mounts, there are these forts, and these are some of the oldest forts that were set up in the mountains in this kingdom. And so Mustang, because it's a imagine it as a peninsular piece of land that's jutting out into Tibet, right? And it is in Nepal, but it is part of the Tibetan geography, but it's politically it's Nepal. So what happened during the 60s was that the Tibetan guerrilla resistance, armed guerrilla resistance force was centered in this place, in Mustang. And Tibetan guerrillas used to launch armed attacks on the Chinese, let's say, military convoys across the border, which we will just see. Today, what's happening is that Mustang is the site, it's been proposed as one of the major trade routes connecting China to India via Nepal. So there is this new pass there's this old pass called Korala, which is about 4,600 meters, one of the lowest passes in the Himalayas. And over there, we will just see what the Chinese are doing and how. So this is a video. I hope it runs. Just one sec. I wanted to show you. Yeah. So this is a video that I took. This is on the way to the border, the pass. I was on a bike while I was shooting this video. And this is in April. And it had just snowed the day before. And let me tell you, it was very, very cold on the bike. And I didn't have gloves. So I somehow managed to get just about like this much. So what we are seeing here, that ridge in the distance, that side is Nepal, obviously. What we see on the left, that was where we are, just beyond the ridge is where the border lies. So this is the border. And this is at that time, China was constructing this immigration and customs building. This is in April 2019. By the end of 2019, this building was complete. The construction of this building was complete. This particular pillar marks the border. It's written, it's not very clear, but it's written Nepal on this side, and on the other side, it's written China. And there's, of course, the no man's land. And there's a very interesting bit you see about this fence that is here at the border. And I will come back to that fence. But before that, I want to talk about Mustang a little bit. And this is Lomantang. Now, that red thing that you see, this is the walled palace. It used to be a palace where the king used to live. And this is the capital of Mustang. And Mustang was also, like Limi, a part of the whole trans-Himalayan trade route. And again, Tibetans used to come down from Tibet with their caravans, carrying salt, gold, wool. From here, they used to take back grains. From Nepal, they used to take back grains and other essential goods. Then this was part of the process for a very, very long time, till the 1960s when, as I said, the CIA had funded Tibetan armed guerrillas, and Mustang was one of the bases from where they used to launch attacks. Now, Mustang has a rich history of Buddhism. These are pictures that I clicked at this village called Chosar, which is about 20 kilometers from the border. On the left is a monastery that is built into the cliff. On the right are these caves where old monks used to meditate, and they're no longer in use, but some of these caves are scattered across Mustang. And the museum was shut at the time, but I believe there is a museum that collects all the, let's say, the archaeological material they found, and they found skeletons dating back to about like 1,500, 2,000 years at least. So we know that Mustang has been inhabited for that long. Now, I want to come back to that fence. This fence that you see, it's incredible. This is part of that same fence that you see growing across the Chinese customs, and in front of the building and it runs for a length of about 22 kilometers. Now, this fence was not there till 1999, but on the night of 31st December 1999, using that very pass that we just saw, the Karmapa, he escaped from Tibet into Nepal. Using two SUVs, he drove till the border where he ditched one of the cars. The other car, till that time, the border used to be open. It was pretty much how we saw in Limi. It was just an open Himalayan pass, right? And so he came across to Nepal, and from via Nepal, then he ended up in India, in Dharamshala, where he gave a press conference saying that I have left Tibet. Now, this fence was erected 6 months after that. I spoke to a journalist who visited the place about 4 months after the Karmapas escape, and he told me that there was no fence at the time. But by the end of 2000, this fence had been erected. So to me, this fence also suggests a very, very interesting perspective of how China views the Himalaya as well. I mean, erecting a fence in the mountains, this is about 16,000 feet, and that is a feat by itself. Of course, we've seen the construction, the under construction building, but beyond that, it's also the sort of Chinese sort of, I would say, in one way, the predilection of the desire to control nature, to think that, okay, if we can put up a fence in the mountains, it can be controlled, the passage of people can be controlled. So it gives us an interesting view into how, let's say, the PRC has viewed the mountains since their arrival in Tibet in 1950. Now, finally, I visited a third border. This is the most interesting of all the borders to me. This border is called Rasua, and it's about 160 kilometers from Kathmandu. Today, it is the most active land border between Tibet and Nepal, or China and Nepal, because the border to the east was damaged during the 2015 earthquake, and since then there have been several issues because of which the border to the east of Kathmandu has not been functional. So this is the border point where a lot of trade, overland trade, is currently happening, and for the past year or so, because of COVID restrictions, China has not allowed this border to function properly, and Nepal has not been able to convince China to make this border function properly. Now, this is the border itself. As I visited it again in April 2019, today this bridge, this is a Bailey Bridge at the time, this is a temporary bridge. To the side of it where that bulldozer is, China was building a new bridge, and the bridge is now complete. Now, Rasua, to me, is a very, very interesting place in terms of also its history, because this was also where Chinese forces, when they fought a war in Nepal in 1792, they entered Nepal from. And this particular photo I have clicked from the Rasuagadi fort, the Nepali fort of Rasuagadi. Looking into there is still there's a small fort of sorts. But what I did in Rasua is I wanted to trace this sort of battle, this war of the past, and how people remember it. So I hiked to this fort, or let's say, I wouldn't call it a fort as much as I would call it, an outpost. But this is a very, very sharp outpost called Kamaregari, and very, very steep on both sides. And on this side as well as the other side, there's just a steep drop down to the river. And it must be a drop of at least 300, 400 meters. And this is, Nepali records show that this is one of the places where Chinese forces suffered one of the biggest setbacks, where several Chinese forces basically fell down the cliff because they were attacking Nepal in June, which is the monsoons, number one. They were attacking. So what used to happen was that, yes, the Chinese came in with about a force of over 10,000, 15,000 soldiers. And numerically, they were much, much superior. But Nepali forces, they knew the lay of the land, and it was the monsoons. So every time from Rasua, as they entered, let's say at Rasua, they held on for about 3-4 days. And then as soon as they became overwhelmed, they shifted back to another position. And they held on to that position for another 2-3 days, just halting let's say, the progress of the Qing army. And this is another one of those spots where they halted this spread of the Qing army, until this town at this base of this hill called Betravati, where Chinese forces and Nepali forces came to a peace treaty, under which Nepal started sending missions to the Qing court till about 1908, 5-yearly missions. And that was a sort of a diplomatic contact that expanded, let's say, the Gorkhali or the Shah King's view of the world as well. Now, Rasua today is a hub of construction. Why it's a hub of construction is because this is where China's, let's say, largest, or the Chinese, let's say, ability to transform or to build massive infrastructure is visible to the Nepalis. At a distance, this is again the border, the customs post. At a distance of 24 kilometers from the border, China is building as I just told you, they're building a bridge, they're building a dry port, they're expanding this dusty road on the Nepali side into a 4-lane highway, and they're building a 110 megawatt hydropower. So this is a massively busy, dusty site full of commerce, full of trade, full of infrastructure development. And Nepalis regularly go across the border to shop, as I did. I will show you. So you cross the border, you cross into the bridge over. Here you check in. There are, let's say, checks, background checks, all of that. Then you just cross over, and there is a massive mall of sorts. And this is where, I mean, as you can see, there's just stores, departmental stores, hotels. They sell Chinese goods. I bought beers for very, very cheap, walnuts for extremely cheap, and we were just sort of comparing prices and how much they would cost in Nepal. Now, as a Nepali, I can just cross across to this border, shop, and come back the same day. And there are no issues on that. But if I had my citizenship card when I was traveling to this border, I could have stayed in China for 24 hours to this other town called Girong, which is about like 24 kilometers away. So, and today, what's happening is that in Limi, like for example, people work in China for about 6 months in a year. For 6 months of a year, they are working in China. In Rasua, that same facility is extended to a year. So residents of Rasua, the village, the district Rasua, they can work in Girong up to a year. And that is because of there's something called Border Citizens Card. And in 2002, Nepal and China had this agreement wherein border citizens of up to 30 kilometers on each side could work in each other's places, each other's countries by using this Border Citizens Card, which is how Nepalis are today working in China. All right. So that was my presentation. And beyond the presentation, what I also wanted to talk about is that how I approached my writing while I was writing these things. Now, the first is about the history, and to me, the history of the Himalaya is a very, very interesting place because it's long been viewed as this buffer, as this security buffer, and nothing beyond that. We've not been talking about its communities and as I've just shown you, that there are dynamic communities living in these mountains for too long. And this is not just in Nepal, in Kumaon, in Himachal, in Kashmir, in Ladakh, we can see that. However, because of this idea that the Himalaya are the periphery, it's always been regarded from a security perspective. And I wanted to break that down, and I wanted to negate that by talking about how communities in these sort of regions also have their own, let's say, histories. So one of the things that I wanted to look at was how societies evolve as history passes them. And secondly, how geography itself shapes the response of societies, as we've seen in the mountains. And while writing, I wanted to look at this idea of trade as a connector, trade as a harbinger of cultural exchange, harbinger of, let's say, religious exchange or societal exchanges, and it creates new avenues even today. And we've seen that. And this is something that I've been talking about in a lot of my, in the book as well, that South Asia, we are some of the most culturally connected people in the entire world, but economically, we are very, very disconnected. And until that happens, until we can be more economically connected, until we can understand how, let's say, the periphery looks at the center both ways, like, for example, let's say how neighboring India looks at neighboring countries of South Asia look at India and vice versa, we will not be able to understand this region in its entirety. So this was part of my thing, that I wanted to take a ground up view. I wanted to take a view of how people in these regions look at themselves, tell their own stories, and tell their own histories. And to do that, I really wanted to steer away, first of all, from this whole idea that the Himalayas need to be a site of exploration, of this romance, of, let's say, viewing it at this untouched part of civilization, or, let's say, part of this, or Kipling's Kim. And I wanted to go away from all those notions. So ultimately, I think what I experienced in my travels was that, like I said, it may be time to stop looking at the mountains, to stop looking at the Himalayas just as a sort of a security buffer, because it is no, in any case, it is no longer that. But if we can understand it from a cultural perspective, if we can understand it from an economic perspective, we will be able to understand how people, how societies in these regions evolved and have therefore come to understand or find their own place in the 21st century. For example, in Limi, I met the sitting MP. He told me that to go to Kathmandu from Limi, people have to cross over into China, to Tibet. From Tibet, then they cross over into India, come down to Almora, then to Mahendranagar near Tanakpur, which is the far western border. Then come back into Nepal, and from Dhangadi, which is again in the far west, take a flight to Kathmandu. So this idea that citizens need to feel connected to a nation, I think unless you make the periphery feel part of the nation, be part of the center, the periphery will not do so. It is part of, let's say, these people, let's say, like people who are living in the borderlands, they will come up with their own solutions. They will find own solutions to, let's say, governance, to community building, to, let's say, society building. The centers always need to assist them. Centers cannot, let's say, be a hindering force or sort of try to absorb them in the larger, let's say, narrative. And I think with that, yeah, with that, I think I'll stop now. Thank you, Vivek.
Yeah, thanks, Amish, for giving us very interesting insights into your work and your book and your travels related to the book. Like there were so many interesting things that we were not aware of, and you made it sound very interesting. And now it's over to the audience for their queries and questions. And maybe we can have the first comment from Brigadier Hirakar. We are like having him after a long time, and because he has been in the army, he has worked in border areas, he can provide his inputs. Mr. Carr, you will have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amish, for the lovely talk and lovely presentation. I've been in Leh for 2 years, so I also know the border areas and these border villages and people living in these border villages. I'm sure you know much more of the people since you've traveled over there and stayed over there a couple of nights. You know much more about the people, the way of living over there. The way the people are living in the villages. Could you tell us something about that? That would be interesting for all of us. I'm sure you'll be staying in the villages, and could you tell us something about the living?
So Mustang is a little bit
things
more
like small things. I mean, just to point out, small things like education.
Yeah.
How much? What do they have? Do they have schools? Do they have medical facilities? Do they aspire to go to the city? The children, do they grow, when they grow up, do they aspire to go to the city? Like, do they want to come to Kathmandu, or they want to go to India, or do they want to go to China? What are their, they also want to grow up. They also want to be modern. They're also seeing in the net. What do the people over there aspire to do? You said the connection between the center and the periphery. Fine. But what is their aspiration? What do they want?
So I'll give you an interesting sort of an anecdote. So in Limi, right, Limi Valley, this Halji village, we entered. I mean, you cross a pass and you enter, and you see there's a mobile tower. All right, there's a mobile tower, but there is no cellular connection. And that mobile tower was set up. I went in September 2018, and the mobile tower had been set up in 2010, 2011. By this private mobile company, by a cellular company. And since then, because the company had shut down, the tower does not work. But everyone in Limi had a smartphone. Everyone in Limi had a smartphone. What they used to do was they used to cross across when they were living in Tibet. They used to fill it up with, let's say, movies, songs, videos, music videos, and of course, over their phones work. And they used to do all of that. And they used to come back. And while they were in Limi, they used to watch this, offline, right? And I think what you're saying about education and this aspiration is very interesting, because a lot of Limi people, as in the mountains everywhere across Nepal, what happens is that the winters are very tough. As you may know, Brigadier, that a lot of people shift down to the cities, or let's say to low-lying areas during the winters. A lot of Limi people move to Kathmandu that way. Most of them have homes here. Most of them have homes outside Nepal as well. They travel, and they're not. I would not consider them. They may be villages in terms of, let's say, the size, in terms of, let's say, accessibility, but in terms of how they view the world, I don't think they are what you call rural people. They're very, very urban. They're very, very in the know of what is happening in the world outside them. Yes, their village does not have, let's say, internet connection, so they do not know. They're not tracking it on a daily basis, but they know what Facebook is. They know, because they know what New York is, because they're traveling there regularly. And there are several, let's say, homes. There's several Limi people who are living in US even now. So that is one thing. In terms of education, there are Nepal government schools there, but a lot of these schools serve only as primary schools. For the secondary education and beyond, a lot of them come down to Kathmandu, where they stay in boarding schools, or they do go down to Dehradun or Saharanpur, where this Tibetan administration in exile runs schools for Tibetan ethnicities, Tibetan ethnic groups, which is what Limi people are. And that is Limi. In Mustang, on the other hand, because Mustang has been open to tourism since 1992, you have to pay a hefty, let's say, fee. It's about $500 for about 10 days to travel into Upper Mustang, to go into Upper Mustang as a foreigner. Mustang's economy has built around tourism, around trekking. So you see hotels, you see like modern hotels, modern amenities. You may even get a hot water bath. I got very lucky, so I got a hot water bath after a few days, I must add. So and similarly in Mustang, the person I met, again, the hotel I was staying at, he had himself come back to Lomanthang only about a week before I did. And till that time, and I had gone in April, and till that time, he had been living in Kathmandu, which is where it's warmer, right, during the winter. So I think when we talk about aspiration, there are different. Every community or every sort of like settlement or people have different aspirations, right? So it's often difficult to, let's say, coalesce them into a larger one particular one. But the one thing that I found across my travels is the desire for a road, a desire for a proper all-weather road that could connect them to towns, to cities all year round. And the hotel owner, the hotel that I was staying at in Lomanthang, he told me, of course, the road damages culture, it damages the environment, and all of that these are obvious, let's say, outcomes. But at the same time, he told me that earlier, there is the nearest airport from Mustang is this place called Jomsum, which is about a week's walk. And he used to tell me that, I remember the days that I had to come back, carry all the goods on donkeys for a week. And today I can make it in a day. So that is I think the one thing that I found unanimously across the Himalayan borders was the desire for a road, to connect them. Let's say, to them, a road is more than just a means of transport. It's a means of reaching out to the world. It's a means of the world coming into them. It's a means of easier access to, let's say, health facilities, to education facilities. And I think that is an important way of looking at this, because if you see in Limi also, the first, let's say, major infrastructure, which was the road, it came from Tibet because it was far easier. The terrain was far easier to build a road from Tibet rather than from Nepal. Because via Nepal, you have to, the hills are pretty steep. The monsoons are obviously, there are frequent landslides. So maintaining a road on this side of the Himalaya is much, much tougher than the other side. So, and they realize, okay, if we are getting all our goods from China, if If the trucks can come in from China, if the bulldozer can come in from China, let's just build a damn road from China itself, which is what they did. And now that very same road is being extended downwards into Humla towards the district headquarters, and then further on into, let's say, the rest of Nepal. So I would say, yeah, roads, perhaps. Does that answer your question in some ways?
A little bit about their education and, you know, did you meet anyone who's a journalist over there or a doctor or an engineer? You know, what I mean is their aspiration to study and look after their own community. Is it there?
I think over there, see, the idea of a community, again, it's very different from, let's say, our let's say, notions of a community. For them, a community is their own village. And like I said, that monastery is the sort of a center of the, let's say, the community. So when we went there for the trade fair, in fact, the monastery had given out a call to the 3 villages and even further beyond, that whoever can participate in the trade fair, please do come to Halji. And that's how we met so many people who were just traveling into the village, coming to that trade fair because the monastery had asked them to. So what we see is that there is, I talk about this in the book in more detail, but there is something called community rules. There is something called Simkral and Ryakral. And there are different sort of like Limi Valley residents, basically, what they do is they look at the Nepali, let's say, laws, Nepali sovereignty in one aspect, the Chinese sovereignty, the idea of, let's say, working in China, all of that in another aspect. But to them, the most important bit is the community rules, let's say, rules within which the villages are set up. So I don't think this idea that, they want to become doctors, they want to become engineers is very, very, let's say, strong. I did not meet anyone, I must say, that I did not meet anyone who was a doctor or an engineer, but I'm sure they already must be from the community. I know several academics from the community. I know several, let's say, people who've gone into anthropology, to histories. But these are also communities that I think one of the first desires is to make money, And because they were trading communities to start with, I think this idea that, if you can make money off trade, right? Like, I mean, the first thing is obviously you have to ensure that, because agriculture is not subsistent level there, they have to depend on outside, let's say, supplies for supplementing their agriculture production. It's not enough. So everyone farms, everyone has a farm, everyone has a field, but the output is just not enough. So you have to bring in food items, which is where the rice and the flour from China come in. So I think the idea, I would say, not as much as, let's say, doctors or engineers, but I would say more in terms of looking at how the village can be self-sufficient. The village can survive into the 21st century with these traditions that they have held on for so long. And how would you evolve? And there are newer challenges of climate change, and like the monastery that we just saw, its walls have cracked because of a glacial lake outburst which happened in 2011, and there have been preservation, let's say, projects going on over there. But it's difficult, I would say.
Thank you very much.
Amish, Mr. Hirakar, he is also a published author. Like, he undertook a adventurous journey on his Java motorcycle. Back in the year, Mr. Kar, you will have to.
No, that was a long time ago. That was way back in 71.
Okay.
Wow.
I was just about 22 years of age then. And a friend of mine and myself, we went around India on a motorcycle.
Wow.
Without a map, without a camera, without money. And 35 days we traveled for about 13,000 kilometers. But that besides, I have been a traveler. I have, being in the army, I've been posted to all these places. I stayed in the Siachen Glacier and all over the Ladakh area. Plus, I made it a point that wherever I got posted, I would like to go and see the outskirts, these villages. And one thing that in the Indian villages also, Indian border villages, like border villages of Bhuj, the Run of Kutch, the Kavda area, the Sir Creek area. Uh, I've been to all the caves. North is Zing, west is the Sir Creek, right? East is Kiputu, south is Kanyakumari. I've been to most of the places. And I generally, when I used to go to these remote villages, I used to try and find out, uh, do you have anyone who's gone to England or UK or America or something like that? And they would have some people, and they would say, "What? He has gone. He does not come back over there." The only place which I found where, let's see if I remember the name, was in Bhuj, a small village called Bujori. They were the first people, I believe, from India who went to South Africa, Bujori, and even now they have contact with South Africa. And when I was in Bhuj, that was in 86, 87, I saw a couple of children with that curly African hair. So one is why I asked you that question is there are people from these villages who are traveling abroad, traveling to India or traveling to US or traveling to UK. Do they come back and try to bring the, try to develop that place for self-reliance? Did you meet anyone who have come back
No,
from?
I think
Places?
at least in Limi, the even in Mustang, in fact, the links, even if people travel out of these, let's say, Himalayan communities, the links they hold with the communities back home is very, very strong. And I've noticed that across the Himalaya, in fact, at least on our side, that it is that socio-religious sort of importance of the monastery, right? At the monastery that is so, let's say, important in let's say upholding these ties. Whoever goes out, like you have a Limi society in New York today, and you have a Limi society in Kathmandu, but you have, and all of them, like for example, these shops that I showed you, these shops that they sell the Chinese, let's say, goods in, they, all of the profits from the shops go into the upkeep of the primary school. So, and like I said, ultimately, I think the idea of development, the idea of modernity, each of these communities sort of also have their own visions, rather than something, let's say, coming from top down, that all right, this is what you need, this is what you want. The in my travels, what I saw was locals were very well able and proficient enough to know what they want, what is their most immediate concern. And I think if we, again, that's where I came from, that if we look at the periphery from the ground up, from looking at what they would like the best, which is why I said everyone wanted a road. And I think we can also understand these places better.
Yeah, thanks, Ramesh. And like, I have been following you on LinkedIn and I have been reading your posts. So while researching the book, like, you came up with a lot of interesting stories which you have included in the book. But as soon as the book was published, there was a LinkedIn post, and you had described a story in that post which you couldn't include in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you please relate that story, because I found that very interesting.
No, what had happened was, see, history, the act of reading history it's always a work in progress, right? You never read enough, never read history and say, okay, I know everything there is to know about a particular time or a place, right? So, and this is what happened. Like, I wrote the book and I sent off the draft and it was in print, and suddenly then I came across this one, let's say, memoir by this old Nepali bureaucrat, and in which he was part of the border mapping, let's say, team, or the Nepal-China border mapping team in the 1960s. It's a very, very interesting story where he went up again. Now, he, in the 60s, what he did was he walked up to Rasua from Kathmandu. From Rasua, he crossed over into China. Yeah, now the Chinese troops are using their, whatever at that time, the trucks on the basic roads. They went all the way to Kailash, which is where I had gone in Limi, and they started mapping the border there. So from border pillars number 1 to 18 of the Nepal-China border, that is what his sort of remit was. And and while coming back, so these guys crossed over. They were stuck in a snowstorm again, like exciting times, let's say, in the mountains. Then they finally arrived in this one. They had to return to, again, what I was talking about, how Limi residents travel to Kathmandu. This guy, he was a bureaucrat, and still he went down into India, and he came back to Kathmandu via Lucknow. So it was, in the 60s, it was like that. Even now, I mean, even now, you don't have a direct flight from, let's say, Kathmandu to Simikot, which is the, let's say, the headquarters of Humla district. So I suppose the more you keep reading history, again, like, I mean, more you'll keep finding out these things.
Yeah, certainly.
I think someone has a question.
Vyas Rajshekar, please go ahead.
Hi, Abhish. A very interesting perspective. I mean, to have about the Himalayan kingdom. So I lived in Himachal for a while, about 4 or 5 years. I lived at this part of it, Kulu, Manali. So what I observed was each valley there is a change of language and the culture. Everything changes. That's called Mandivi, Kuluvi. So including the cultural aspect changes completely. So do you see that kind of differences between each valley, and what is the language basis? I mean, how the language arrived for them? Like example, is it very different? Is they close to more Chinese, or is it?
No. So across at least the Nepali Himalayas, and I think stretching a little bit into Kumaon as well. I'm not really sure about Kumaon, but this needs to be checked. But there is an entire belt where the people who are living in these belts are of Tibetan ethnicities, and they speak Tibetan, but they speak different, let's say, variants of Tibetan. And sometimes the variants can be so different that, let's say, people from Limi cannot understand people of Mustang's Tibetan. And I'm sure, and I think that's something that you will find across the region. And that is also, that comes back again to my initial argument that these areas, the Himalayas was a zone of cultural synthesis, like where so many cultures, so many, let's say, ethnic groups, religions just came together and they evolved with each other's, and that interaction gave birth to different, let's say, variants of languages of the same language. You use the same script, but the language is entirely different. You may not be able to understand each other. So that is something that I found in the Nepali Himalayas as well.
Yeah, because that's what the case. Because most cases, absolutely, we can't understand the other language at all, completely.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, if there's all the civilization around the Himalayan thing, do you have any commonness you feel culturally?
I mean, see,
what they have the same terrain.
You see Vajrayana Buddhism, Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhism, which is essentially Vajrayana. That is one of the major, let's say, linking factors. But I would also say one should also look at the way, let's say, trade was done. This whole idea of basically this idea that salt, wool and gold used to come from Tibet and grains used to go from there was common across the Himalayan belt. Okay. I mean, you see it from Bhutan to Sikkim, to Nepal, Kumaon, even Himachal, all the way to Ladakh. And you used to see that happening all the time. And I don't know if it used to happen in Himachal. I'm sure the brigadier must have seen it. When I was a child growing up in Pokhara in the 90s and the late 80s, you used to see these caravans of donkeys and sheep coming down, coming down from the north, and during Dasera, which is one of our major festivals, and they used to go back up before, let's say, the winter sets in. Yeah. So those sites aren't common anymore, but you used to see that at that time. So,
because one of the interesting things when I was living was that I was invited for a marriage in a different district, is a different valley. So we went in the morning, 11 o'clock as usual. I'm from Chennai. So we thought it's for the lunch, so we went for 11 o'clock. The food never was served. We waited for 2 o'clock, not served. 3 o'clock, not served. We were hungry. Then we checked the friend who invited us. So what's the problem? He said, no, the lunch or the whatever is served is only at 7 p.m. Because in the same district, the next district, they serve at 3 o'clock. In this district, Mandi district, they serve later. So this is, quite contrasting cultural difference between the same, within 2 kilometers here, 2 kilometers there, it's very different. So I think it's common. Is very, very interesting. Yeah.
I would say the link would be if if you're interested, like, I mean, the link would be to trace, let's say, how Buddhism is practiced. And you will
Okay.
find a lot of links there. And let's say
Okay.
the religion gives a lot of idea into how, let's say, these
Okay.
communities interacted with each other.
That's a connector between this,
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's cool. Very nice. Nice to know, because they have the common
Thank you.
terrain,
Yeah.
same,
Yeah. Yeah.
difficulties are
No, and you'll
common.
see, like, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure when you saw those pictures, and the brigadier will confirm that, like, I mean, the houses in Ladakh, right? Houses in Ladakh look very similar to houses in, let's say, Mustang. And I have several friends in Leh when I put up pictures of Mustang, and they were like, "Oh, this looks like Leh, this looks like Ladakh," and because obviously the terrain is so similar, and ultimately, like, I mean, solutions
Similar.
end up
Have to
being
be similar.
similar, right?
Yeah.
So
Very nice. Very thanks for a good insight to that Himalayan. Yeah.
Be surprised when I was in Leh in 91 to 93. There was a sprinkling of rain one day, just a few drops. And the local people, the village which was just next to my unit, they came running. They were surprised. They were shocked. Is it something that God is not happy about, or is he happy about? Because they'd never seen rain. We always saw snow, never rain.
yeah,
And as far as the language is concerned, what you were saying, it is not the difference of language, it's the difference of dialect.
yeah.
And this is there everywhere. If you go to Bangladesh, I'm a Bengali. I mean, I was born in India, but then we were from a place like Sylhet. The language, the dialect of Sylhet is totally different from the dialect of Dhaka, totally different from the dialect of Mohammed Singh. And you can't understand the dialect of one place. I mean, I cannot understand the dialect of places other than Sylhet. Sylhet, I can understand a little bit because my parents used to speak that, but I can't speak. So what you've seen in the various villages are the changes in dialect because they did not have geographical connection between these places at that time. Or the geographical connection was very little. So whatever way the people started talking, that is what went on.
Yeah.
But generally the language remained the same. And what you rightly said, what used to put them together is the way they practice the religion. Whatever religion, the way they practice it, that is what used to get them together. Because the Buddhism in Ladakh is Buddhism different there, Buddhism different in Gaya or something like that.
Amish, we now have a question from Divya Munjal. She is asking, you spoke about Mustang and Limi people going to China for 6 months or 1 year on work visa. So what kind of jobs are available for these people in China?
No, so Mustang, this is very, 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 again, one more way in which that wired border makes sense is that Mustang people aren't allowed to work in China. Mustang is the only district whose residents cannot work in China because of China's own security, let's say, reasons, whatever it may be, right? In Limi, they can work for about 6 months. In Raswa, they get it's not a work visa as much as it's a border citizen's card. I mean, it's just an ID card that tells you that you're a resident of this district. And in Raswa, you're allowed to work for a year in China. And the sort of work that they get in Limi, a lot of them work as construction site labor. If the women work as, let's say, restaurant cleaners, hotel maids, apartments. The men who can afford it, they set up shops, they set up restaurants. In Raswa, similarly, a lot of them work in because of the amount of, let's say, intercountry trade that's happening. Girong has become the center, this another border town filled with trucks, filled with, let's say, cargo trucks, things like that. So there are a lot of hotels. There are a lot of, let's say, like, restaurants that have opened up, stores. So Nepali people, in fact, the man I was traveling with, he was asking me, do you think it's a good idea to invest in, let's say, vegetable farming in China, and to sell vegetables in China? And I was like, yeah, I mean, on paper, it just sounds like a great idea, but like, go ahead. I can't, who am I to discourage you? So, so there are all sorts of gigs. It's not, I wouldn't call it, let's say, urban, in the traditional sense of, let's say, working as in a bank or working as, let's say, as a working class professional. It's essentially an alternative to your own district. It's an alternative of a way of livelihood where you're earning significantly more than what you would have earned in Nepal. Yeah. So, like, for example, I mean, like I said, like in Limi Valley people, when they go to Taklakot or Purang, they earn about, like, daily wage is about 150 RMB a day. And that's about 2200, 2500 NC a day, about 1500 INR. And that's a lot. That's a lot by any measure. And so it becomes a sort of a livelihood. It's more of a livelihood than, let's say, proper job, So,
Thanks, Amish, for explaining this.
So, Amish,
yes, Devanand, please go ahead.
Yeah, it was a wonderful presentation. For almost 3 years, I used to go to Nepal for my official work. So I traveled a bit around the entire around Nepal. So I work in an FMCG company. So I know how the distribution of products reach. So I was not even surprised when you said that the stocks had come from China, because we used to, in our monthly meeting, we used to say that from this border it has gone to that border and all sort of things. So this is very, very prevalent. So this is the one thing which happens very easily. And second is for any Nepali, I know how much the road means for them, because one of my distributor once was talking about the road to China in a great way, like, this is the road, this is the future. That's how everyone talks in Nepal. And somebody are talking about Limi also. So today I got a very good perspective about that one. And again, the one interesting point you had mentioned was like how people in the cross border, which actually should be encouraged to talk to each other, because generally it is a much better one, but politically there are various compulsions and things which never happen. Because currently I work in Bangladesh now, and people are from this side across the border. There are many relatives are there. Like it is like that, and I know the pain, because there are a lot of my friends from India who originally belong to Bangladesh. So there are times I had asked them to come here and go back. I will help them out. So they have very, very different memories. So if that was there, it would have been it would have been a fantastic one. Like we should definitely encourage, at least in the near the border areas. A lot of relatives are there. So I have seen in the northern side of Bangladesh also there is the Garo tribes. So both have very good relatives are there, and once in a year they've been permitted to go here and there. So even that is a very big occasion here. So that is something which it's a very interesting perspective you covered, and definitely I would like to read your book. So I'll buy it and start reading that one. And thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for everything.
No, this is the most my pleasure. This border is a very interesting idea, because my former boss, I mean, the India-Nepal border, it is another, I mean, it's a fascinating place. My boss who lives, my former boss, he comes from the eastern border of Nepal. And he used to tell me that when they were kids, when they used to play cricket, a boundary used to mean you have to go to India to collect the ball. So
yeah, correct.
So yeah. And in some places just a river. In some places it's like a rice field is separated between India and Nepal, So I think borders, in fact, borders, we have this idea that borders are these things that stop people from communicating with each other. They stop, let's say, people from, let's say, going across, and they become these sort of lines on the ground that, oh, you cannot cross this. And I read this very interesting quote by this anthropologist, James Scott, who said that maps are essentially a reductionist way of the center trying to make a sense of this chaos that happens on the ground, this let's say, this dynamic, let's say, things, the way you're talking about the India-Bangladesh border of people just like going to each other, of what the brigadier was talking about, like, in Bhuj, let's say, like you have people going all the way to South Africa, and obviously that's somewhere else. But this idea that what the map shows is just how you end up imagining these places. And when you actually land up in these borderlands, and then you get a different idea that, oh, societies are so different, so unique. And in the western border of Nepal, in Kumaon, there's this town called Darchula, which is this side of the border. And the other side in India is this other town called Dharchula. And they have, like, let's say, relations. People from Darchula study in Dharchula, they marry there, they work there, and they come back to sleep in Nepal. And similarly, like, vice versa. So there are these such interesting interactions happening on the ground, no?
Yeah.
Good to see Sudhanshu also. He's a future speaker. He's an adventure cyclist. So Sudhanshu, any comments, any views, any plans for travel to Nepal?
Namaste, Amish. That was quite an informative session for me, because I remember back in 2016, when I got into cycle and adventure and a lot of things, I was researching on the old Silk Mountain Road, which connects Asian countries to European countries for trade and purposes, because I wanted to cycle the whole route. I think it's now called Pamir Highway as well. So especially when we talk of the road and the places which are so remote, it kind of gets me excited all the time, because I have been to Zanskar, Lahore so many times that when I 2-3 years back, when I went there were no roads. Now they have built the roads. Now Zanskar is connected to Leh. But 2-3 years back, it was just dirt roads, like how you talked about in the villages. So I remember I crossed Shinkula Pass and I got down to a village called Lakhang. And over there is a small dhaba, and in that dhaba there is a guy called Gombo. So when you reach and you stay with him for one day, he will just say, when you come back, get me some magazines from Manali. So I was so intrigued that he keeps telling it to the people that whenever you come from that side, get me some magazines. And similarly, when you get into more of Zanskar and those Purne, I met a guy who learned many languages. And yet he came back to village, and now he takes special trekking courses with such kind of people who knows those languages. So I was able to relate with you a lot more on the how people connect. Instead of just having borders, they still connect, and they still stick with their roots. So thank you for that session.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. I'm sure, I wish I could cycle as you have, but I'm more of a walker, so I'll take some time. But I think that's an interesting thought. And it would be interesting to me to that person. Maybe the next time you meet him, you should ask him, why does he ask for these magazines? What does he? What is that a way that he feels connected to the outside world? He feels connected to, let's say, I don't know. It's very what I was telling the brigadier, that idea of what modernity is. The idea of okay, in our urban imagination, when we come to the cities, in our imagination, modernity means something else. It means, let's say, proper infrastructure. It means okay, you have Ubers, you have startups, things like that, right? But in Limi, in places like Limi, should we even be talking about, let's say, public transportation when the road is itself not ready, or should we be talking about doctors and surgeons when all they have is a primary healthcare center, and it's shut for half of the year? And for example, their school, like I said, they have a primary school. Most of the secondary education is either in Kathmandu or, let's say, in Dehradun or Saharanpur, where at these Tibetan government in exile run schools. And when I was writing, I did not think of it from that perspective that okay, do I want to make sense of what they want to do, or should I just be writing about how they see the world, and rather than and it's very, and while in travel writing, it's a curious sort of a phenomenon that you tend to be the subject. As a writer, you tend to be the subject yourself, because you are seeing the world. Therefore, you see this in a lot of the great travel writing. You see Naipaul, that's what he does. Essentially, he's the subject and he's viewing the world. And for me, I wanted to take a step back and sort of allow them to tell their story. And by doing that, I think it gives me a more of a understanding of what their aspirations, how they view the world, things like these. And like you said, like, I mean, to me, I would be fascinated to know why he asks everyone to get magazines. Like, that would be such a fascinating thing.
Yeah, true. Even I was intrigued because that guy, although he looks like he's from that village, and but he is a college graduate from Chandigarh, and he decided to stay in that lonely place, and that place is so wild that like for kilometers you don't have any other place to eat also or sleep. So he's just staying in that remote area. I was so surprised that he just asked for those magazines.
So yeah, I mean, there you have it. Like, I mean, that's the thing, no? Like, I mean, this guy is a college graduate, and you expect him to be in a city, doing a regular job, right? But yeah, I suppose he's happy, and that is why he's doing what he's doing, no? Even in that remote place, like just running this, let's say, dhaba. so that's what I think. To me, like, I don't want to romanticize that life, because I know it's a tough life. Like, it's a very, and it's not a life that I think I would be able to live. Like, I don't think none of us would be able to do that every day, doing that. But the fact that these guys choose to do it, and for many people, obviously they don't have that choice. It is, but I mean, for this person that you're talking about, he was a college graduate, and therefore he could have gone to a more urban area, but he chose to return. That tells me a lot about also the connect that, let's say, these places or your, let's say, native places have, the pull that they have on you. No?
Yeah, I agree to that.
This wanting magazines is not very uncommon in the army. When you're in far-off posts, when people go back from leave, they carry a magazine or two, let's say in the glacier or in the other field areas. Yes, we do carry a couple of good magazines, colorful ones, for the people to see over there. Yes, we always require that.
I have a question to you, Amish. Sorry to interrupt. Like I said, I was very interested to know more about that old silk route. And I would like to know from your side, like, do you have more idea about that route? Was it the same route you were talking about, or like, if as a layman, can I enter into those areas?
Yeah, see, if the route that the Nepal traders used to be in like I said, from Kathmandu, they used to come down to, let's say, Calcutta. From Calcutta, go up to Kalimpong via Nathula, then travel on to Lhasa. And Lhasa was this cosmopolitan city where you had traders from Central Asia coming in. You had traders, tree traders from like China, from Guangzhou, all these places used to come in, from Canton, all these places. You had Mongols coming from the north. You had Nepalese coming in from the south. So this was this sort of a, let's say, a very, very cosmopolitan city at the time. And Lhasa, when you talk about the Silk Road, you don't actually think about Lhasa being part of the Silk Road. But what we also imagine of the Silk Road is not just one single highway. There are also peripheries, there are also like offshoots of it. Like, for example, when you talk about the Khyber Pass, when we talk about the Grand Trunk Road that comes in from Khyber Pass and goes all the way to Calcutta, the offshoots that developed from this road are equally important. No? Like, I mean, so similarly, I think if today, I don't know whether you can follow the same route. Maybe when the pandemic is a little better, perhaps like, via Sikkim, you may be able to cross over into Tibet, to Lhasa, and from Lhasa, perhaps go on further into Xinjiang and Gansu, which is where the actual Silk Road to Europe joins up. That's sort of a thing. But I would love to, like, I mean, that is an imagination that I think I will carry with myself.
I will give you the start of the Silk Route. The start of the Silk Route. I went to a place called Xi'an in China. Xian.
Xi'an, yeah. It's the old capital.
Yeah, I went over there. It's like a fortress. It has got a wall all around, and I knew that was from the books I had read. That is the start of the Silk Route. I went about asking everyone, no one could tell me. Till I suddenly saw a line of statues in a park. And I went over there. From the rear of the line of statues, there were camels, horses, donkeys, horses, and things like that. About 10, 15 of them and a long one. When I went to the front portion, the big plaque, and there it was written, here's the start of the Silk Route. You know, double-humped camels and all that. This is the start of the Silk Route. There the drawing was there, as you were rightly saying. The Silk Route is not just one road. From there, you know, different routes go out in different directions. One such road came through the Zanskar Valley and one through the Nubra Valley of Ladakh, where what you see, the double-humped camels over there in the Nubra Valley, is what the traders have left behind because these camels were sick. These camels then grew up and gave birth to more camels. And today, this I'm talking of 1991. Today, the tourist, the travel agents are using it for tourism, giving people a ride somewhere in Leh and places like that. So the start, if you're going on a bike tour, you start from that point in Xiang or Xinjiang, whatever they call it, where the plaque is there for the start of the Silk Route.
Another interesting one that you may be interested to track, Sudhanshu, is the one from they used to take, like Kashmiri traders used to take to Lhasa. You know, so they used to go via, I assume with these passes, the Zanskar, the Nubra Valley passes, I would assume through that itself. And via, like, you know, going from the back of Kailash. So, like, you're just parallel to Limi. So you're just going back by that road. So it'll be interesting. Like, I mean, even because I know that Spiti also connects to Kailash, the route. Like, I mean, there is a route that comes out to the Satluj. I believe, I think Alice Albania, she's written this book called Empires of the Indus, in which she traces the Indus's journey right up to the Satluj's source near Kailash. And she takes, I think she takes that route via Zanskar. So.
Wow, that would be nice.
Cycling will be difficult. Walking will be
well, just to share that my kind of cycling involves a lot of hike with the bike. So I'm very excited to know more about these.
Yeah, we can obviously I mean, this old Silk Road is something you can keep talking about like forever, because in any way, like you like you said, no, like I mean, like Brigadier was saying also that it's not one route, right? Like it's not, there is no single route. There are different like offshoots, there are different variants of it. And within, like, for example, if the traders from Central Asia and let's say China, etc., were not coming into Lhasa, Neva traders, would they have found it profitable only dealing with Tibetan nationals? I don't know. I mean, perhaps they found it more and more profitable because more and more traders started coming into Lhasa from these many regions, right? So,
yeah, totally. I mean, the only thing I knew about Lhasa and Tibet was through the 7 Years in Tibet movie. And today I learned a lot more thanks to you.
No, my pleasure.
I'm glad I could,
there is a lot more on Tibet, I would say. Like, I mean, Tibet and India, in fact, there is some really, really good material out there. I would recommend sharing Shakya's book. Like, that is a Dragon in the Land of Snows. So that's a history of modern Tibet. Like, and there is another book called Tibet, a History by this Yale historian called Sam von Scholk. Like, those two books are very, very good. Like they give you a primer into Tibetan, so let's say, past, much, let's say, beyond that romantic idea of the Dalai Lama, the Buddhism angle. No, that's like a lot of, like, 7 Years in Tibet. That there's that other film Kundun. If you've seen that, there's a Martin Scorsese film Kundun. So these gave that idea of Tibet being this, like, oh, Shangri-La, that sort of a thing. But it really wasn't. Like, I mean, it was a very, very cosmopolitan society looking towards modernity. In my research, I found that one of the Dalai Lama and the Neva traders had close enough relationships that the Karmapa and the Neva trader has a close enough relationship that the previous Karmapa asked a Neva trader to get him a Rolex watch from Calcutta. and the trader had gifted him a Rolex watch, and this is in the late 1940s. So and just yesterday I discovered the Dalai Lama had a pet elephant in Lhasa. And I don't know how, but he had a pet elephant. So
Wow.
Movie 7 Years in Lhasa.
yeah.
So it's on the Netflix.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amish and Sudhanshu. Now I have to your research. And Amish, I have a last question for you. Like, you are also working as a consulting editor. So can you tell us about that role with this literary agency, right side?
Okay. So I started my career in publishing as an assistant commissioning editor back in Heshet, India in 2011. So, and I left Heshet in 2016. I was a senior commissioning editor by then. I was commissioning a lot in nonfiction. I was commissioning a lot of crime fiction, historical fiction. Then I joined Juggernaut, which is this digital publishing startup where I became a digital editor. And thereafter, I worked at Juggernaut for about 2 years. And then after that, now I'm working as consulting editor for Writers Side Literary Agency. What I do, or rather what we do, is basically we are a literary agency. We represent authors from across South Asia, from the US, UK, Southeast Asia. And my role is to go over manuscripts, to, let's say, assess them, to see whether we can represent them to publishers, and if we see potential in particular manuscripts, how we can turn them around. And we give editorial feedback. We ask authors to work on the manuscript if they can, and then alongside, once the manuscript is up to, we think that it's become the strongest, we represent them to various trade publishers across India and also in the UK and US. So that's what I do currently, basically.
Thanks, Amish, and all the best for your book. Thanks to all the participants for this interesting and wonderful conversation. Next week, we'll be back at 4 p.m. with the true stories of Indian cyclists. It will be a panel, so we will have basically 3 speakers and Malvika Tiwari, who runs a community for cyclists. It's called Cyclop, and we will also have the editor of the book, Neera Jain. And tomorrow at 11 a.m. we will have our editorial related webinar on Perfected by Mr. Yatindra Joshi. So thanks everyone. Thanks Amish, and have a nice day.
Thank you so much, Greg. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. My pleasure being here.
Good insight. Lovely.
Bye.